Hello and welcome to everyone joining us today. I am Marisa Gomez. I am the Public Programs Manager at the Santa Cruz Museum of Natural History, and I'm super excited to talk about one of my favorite aspects of our local natural phenomena tonight, rocks and fossils. And we're going to be joined in a little bit by our Collections Manager Kathleen Aston, as well as a friend of the museum, paleontologist and educator, Wayne Thompson. And tonight's event is part of a monthly series that we offer for our members. This is an opportunity to dig deeper into the collections that the museum stewards and by extension that you all steward. As a reminder for you, the Santa Cruz Museum of Natural History is a nonprofit organization sustained entirely by contributions from our community, including through membership. So I just wanted to make sure I take a moment to thank you for your support, and also just to share that I hope that through this series and through tonight's program, you feel more connected to our natural world and to the museum as an institution. And we started tonight with, I asked y'all to use the chat to share your feelings about nature. I've got a couple answers in here. And we've got eerie, grateful, concerned, grateful for wildlife, unsurprising sepia tones. And, often at the museum, when I ask people how they're feeling about nature, I get things like, people expressing their interest in the biodiversity of the region. They talk about the ocean. They talk about the redwoods, these things that they love about our natural world. And lately, I feel like we've been, those words and the things that are on our mind have been a little bit different, as we are seeing in the chat. I've been hearing a lot of descriptions about the nature of Santa Cruz recently being described as apocalyptic and eerie and dreary and disastrous. And so I just wanted to share that, that's one of the things about our natural history. It's not static, it changes. And one of our most important tools that we have for understanding the past, and by extension, gaining perspective on where we are today, is by looking at the fossil record and the rock record. One of the ways we know about how regular fires have been over millennia is because of ash in sediment deposits, for instance. So today we're going to be, zooming out a little bit. I know we've all been kind of hyper-focused probably for some time, but we're going to zoom out a little bit today and view our natural world from a slightly different vantage point. Let me get this going for you. To do that, we are going to explore the museum's paleontological collection, our fossil collection. And so I'd love for us to also start by exploring what fossils mean to us individually and what we love about fossils. So if you could also, again, jump onto the chat and share if you've ever found a fossil before. And if you have found a fossil before, let us know, where were you and what was it? I know for me, my first memories of finding fossils were with my dad when I was really little. He took me to Nevada to an ancient lake bed, and there were all these, actually it was a seabed, and there were all these sea creatures, all these shell fossils there, and I was just totally mind boggled that we had driven hours and hours to get there away from the coast to find these examples of ocean life. So that's it for me. Curious what it is for you. And also, part of those experiences may have been about collecting fossils too. You may have collected fossils at certain points in your life, which I think is one of the experiences that young naturalists the world over have found to be a captivating practice. And that's really what we're going to be exploring today. In addition to sharing insights about our local fossil record, we're also going to be digging into the museum's history and the collectors, many of whom began as young students who have helped to build our collections over time. But before we do that, I just wanted to make sure that we all kind of understand what fossils are. And this may seem basic, but let's just make sure we're on the same page. So this is a graphic that I found that isn't entirely accurate for the fossils of Santa Cruz, but it's kind of what we think about when we think about fossils a lot. It's dinosaurs, right? We think about something like a dinosaur dying and then being, absorbed into the earth, and then out comes a fossil. And what we're seeing here is really similar to what we do have here in Santa Cruz. So we've got the organism dies, is covered in water, gets buried in sediment, and then over time that sediment is exposed and we see that creature. And this is a really like rare thing to happen, because most organisms that die, they do not become fossilized, they do not become preserved in that way. And there are different types of fossils. So when an organism is preserved, it can be done in a number of different ways. You can even have, maybe for, I'm sure pretty much all of us have watched the Jurassic Park movies before. So we probably have this image in our mind of an insect suspended in amber, and that is a form of a fossil. Same too with mummified organisms, where you still really have the organic material itself. But most of the time we're talking about either the replacement of organic material or evidence that organic material was once there. So evidence could be a trace fossil, which is like when we see footprints that have been preserved, or one of our favorites, coprolite, which is fossilized feces, which we do have some examples of in our museum collections. We're also probably mostly familiar with these two, molds and casts or replacement. And, you know, a lot of the fossils that we do have in Santa Cruz are kind of, I like to think of them as sort of like in between these two, because if you look at this image, a lot of these, it's not that there's been a replacement. These are still the calcium carbonate. It's still the shell itself. Some of them, they are going through a mineralization process, but really it's that the shell is encased in rock. So enough time has passed for sediment to lithify, to become rock, but it's not necessarily that they've gone all the way through the process of being replaced, the organic material being replaced by minerals. But we do definitely have that type here in Santa Cruz. We also definitely have examples where it's a mold, where there was something there, it's no longer there, but you see the impression of it. So that's what we talk about when we talk about the fossils of Santa Cruz. And really what it comes down to is the rocks of Santa Cruz too. So in order to understand our fossil record, you can look into the organisms themselves, but a big part of it is understanding the rocks that hold these organisms, these fossils. So these are some geologic maps of Santa Cruz. We do have a very varied geologic region, as does quite a lot of California. But our main rock formations that we have here that are what we find fossils in are these three. And so these are all sedimentary rocks. Just a little crash course again, reminder, there's metamorphic, igneous, and sedimentary rocks. And sedimentary rocks are when you've got sediment that hardens into rock. And our sedimentary rocks here are rocks that have been created off the coast. And then because of our varied geologic region, again, there's a lot of tectonic activity here. We are on a fault line, the San Andreas Fault, that is now, the Pacific plate is pushing upwards against the North American plate, and that tension is causing the Santa Cruz Mountains to be what they are today. And as that happens, Earth lifts up and more sediment occurs in the ocean, Earth lifts up, more sediment occurs in the ocean. So the rocks that we see right at the coast are actually our younger rocks, and the farther up that you go into the mountains, you find older rocks. But we're finding fossils in sedimentary rocks, sandstones, mudstones, and more sandstones. And so the Purisima Formation is one formation that you see around Lighthouse Point in Santa Cruz, and then south along the Monterey Bay. And really great evidence of these fossils are in Capitola. And this formation, you primarily see mollusks, cetaceans like whales, so whale, jawbones, vertebrae, and also pinnipeds, so something like a seal and maybe a seal skull. Then we have the Santa Cruz mudstone, which is slightly older, also on the coast though, because of some varying factors, but if you've been to Natural Bridges, you've looked at Santa Cruz mudstone. And this is another rock that does contain fossil evidence. Again, mollusks, also urchins, and even megalodon teeth. Megalodon being that extinct giant shark that actually did swim in the waters along whatever the coast of this general area looked like at the time, millions of years ago. And then a little bit older, the Santa Margarita sandstone is also one of our like very rich areas of fossils. This is, if you go to the Bonny Doon Ecological Reserve, there's this popular spot that people refer to as the Moon Rocks, which is Santa Margarita sandstone. If you grew up in the area, you may have gone to Shark Tooth Alley in Scotts Valley, famous for people being able to pretty easily find fossilized shark teeth. And then you also have sand dollars. A lot of the museum's collections that are from this formation are sand dollars. But then you also have whales and sea cows, really interesting stuff. And we love fossils at the museum because they're wonderful tools for engaging people with the natural world. They also help us to better understand our environment by understanding it, not just in the context of how we see it today, but how it has existed over time. And we do this through our collections, which we're going to be exploring today. And so I just wanted to share some of the ways that that happens and why our collections are so important to us. In addition to preserving history, there are also just these wonderful tools. So I don't know if all of you are familiar with this, but around the museum's garden, the park that we're in, we have placed a lot of very large fossils that surprise people just wandering through the park thinking that these are just big rocks. And then if you look closer, you actually realize that there's a whole other story there. We also have on permanent display geology and paleontology exhibits and interactives for students and youth who come to the museum. And also through our programming, we offer things like our Rock and Pop-Up. I hope that many of you have had the opportunity when the museum was opened to the public to come by and talk to Gavin and Graham, who are local geologists who invite people to bring in rocks to the museum and they'll help you identify them. And we've also, since the museum closed our doors due to the pandemic, we have switched this to a virtual program. And you can tune in, chat with them, and talk about rocks. And again, rocks have a lot to do with our fossil record as well. We wouldn't have fossils if it weren't for rocks. So just wanted to say that. And so again, just to reiterate that today we're going to be talking about our collections, but also talking about the fossil record of Santa Cruz and also hear from one of our important collectors and members of the museum's community. But at this point, I want to bring in our collections manager, Kathleen Aston, so that she can help fill us in a little bit more on the museum's fossil collection. So hi, Kathleen.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I was going to say I'm going to further ground our discussion in the museum's fossil collection, which is me trying to make a pun, which I'll probably do a couple more times during the course of this presentation. So I'm sorry, guys. Maurice is much better at like rock and geology and paleontology related puns than I am. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So just a quick overview of the fossil collection. We have more than 1,400 cataloged fossils and a bunch of other fossils that still need to be, accessioned and cataloged and reviewed, and other specimens in our education collection, which are tracked a little bit differently, which is a thing that I'm definitely a nerd about. Our primary focus is on the fossils of Santa Cruz County, but we do have things from, some interesting fossil beds with a lot of like ferns and things from Philadelphia. We even have like a set of microfossils that are from near Denmark, which I think we talked about at one of the last collections close up. So there's a pretty broad range. And even locally, there's a pretty broad range. We have everything from shark's teeth, which some of you mentioned that you like saw while you were growing up, to a lot of like sea cows. So, animals, vertebrates and invertebrates. Like this, fossil sand dollar relative, which I think is like just the patterns on it are incredibly beautiful. And then we have, trace fossils. We've got fossils in amber. We have casts of like actual fossils. So where, you're going to cast a specimen to either study it or to be able to reproduce it for an exhibit or something like this. And most of these specimens were built, in kind of the last 50 years. And you might notice, as Marisa did when we were going through this earlier, that a lot of these specimens say that they're from the Santa Margarita Formation. And that's mostly because right now I'm working on inventorying our fossil collections, and I happen to be working in a lot of those drawers lately because we organize our fossil collection according to, the geologic time, like where a thing was found, the formation, which is connected to that. Within that, there's various localities. And so just to like double back really quickly, you would have seen that there's these, you might have noticed that there's a little bit of editing here because locality information is something that we try to be really careful about when we're, making records available to the public. It's one of the specific specificities about managing paleontological collections. And then, another way that we would organize them is by individual collector. And so you'll see on some of these here, the Glen collection. So this is a collection of a lot of specimens that came mostly from the Scotts Valley area and were given to the museum a number of years ago, and kind of like, show to the extent to which our collections are very much shaped by our like understanding of collectors. Or excuse me, are very much shaped by like the collectors who gave items to us or worked on cataloging things and stuff like this. Also, aren't all of these teeth really cool? I've been like really stunned lately by like we have all these different like such a huge diversity. This is just like one example from like a mammoth tooth that's like this big to shelves upon shelves of shark teeth to like drawers upon drawers of pinnipeds, so like walrus and sea lion and seal relatives. We've got a lot of different teeth in the collection. So like I mentioned, I'm working on inventorying the collections. Another thing we're working on, a lot of our, because we've had such a robust paleontological community around the museum for most of its life, but especially the last 50 years or so, the paleontological collections are the most well computerized or digitized right now, but we still need to do some record enrichment. So you see this record is pretty scarce. And here's our little like digitization station set up where, we're photographing things not only to track their conditions, but also to make them like a little bit more publicly accessible, a little bit more visually exciting, and then, also just to have like a richer record. So, when we're working on things like this, myself and the other staff who work in the collections, we're using a variety of community resources. So it's not just individual collectors, but especially now that there's such a big push for sharing data in the scientific community across small and large museum collections, we rely on a bunch of these different institutions for like insight and help. And I think I kind of wanted to highlight in particular the UC Museum of Paleontology, which might come up later, has a lot of really great educational resources, and they're the primary paleontology repository for the state. And then this American Museum of Natural History Collections portal is good both for like professionals and then also amateur paleontologists. So that's kind of the scope of the collections themselves. And then we did want to sort of highlight this relationship of the collectors to the collections. How people are like connecting to science and nature through collecting is a big part of what we do. So that has kind of its foundation, as many of you know, but some of you I think might be new to this story, in Laura Hecox, who grew up as the daughter of Santa Cruz's first lighthouse keeper, wandering the shores of the Santa Cruz coastlines, collecting shells and fossils and specimens. Later became the lighthouse keeper herself, and then had a museum where she showed off her collections for many years, and everyone knew about it, were excited about it. She corresponded with scientists of the day and even got a fossil specimen named after her. So if you can see, it's number 8 right here. So this is the specimen that was described in the U.S. Geological Survey article here, which describes Laura's collection of specimens and interest in natural history that has been an inspiration to have all who have had the pleasure of her acquaintance. And so she later went on to give her museum to the city, which opened as the first public museum in Santa Cruz in 1905. And it's nice that we have like this publication and her collections, because we really don't know a lot more about her, but we can tell, she didn't leave diaries or the correspondence that she did have with, individual scientists about different specimens and stuff. We don't have a lot of that left, but what we do have shows a continued interest in fossils. So this is some scrapbook articles about fossils that she was collecting, and then her cataloging notebooks about fossils. So that is sort of, our foundational story of, a collector who shaped our museum, but we have a number of other paleontologists and collectors who have been a big part of our history, too many to name. But one highlight is longtime friend of the museum, Frank Perry, who's here receiving the Laura Hecox Naturalist Award in 2017. And so Frank's been involved in the museum since he was a young man, and he has, I think, really exemplified the sort of varied way you can get involved with museums and paleontology specifically, because he's been involved in, this is him putting together the fossil sea cow cast that still hangs in our gift shop today. These are, notes from a class that he did on local coastal geology with some paleontology info thrown in there, as far back as the 80s and before. And he even recently did a lecture for us, last year, and helps us with everything all the time. One exciting aspect about the way that he's engaged with our collections is he's done research and even produced some small publications for the museum. And these are still on sale in our gift shop, and they're like very exciting reads. And they really are a way, when people are like working with our collections and doing research on them, it's a great way for us to be able to, for them to help us engage the public. And these booklets were actually, inspirational to this young man here whose collection is in the museum today, who was really involved in the conservation efforts as a young kid locally in fossils. Specifically focusing on fossils, another person who was involved in fossil hunting in California and got into conservation. That's like another, common story, and then went on to be a professional academic paleontologist is Dr. Robert Bosnicker, also called Bobby. He's given a number of specimens to the museum. He's helped us with things, and he's, published academically. And you can see this paper co-authored with Frank on our collection, which again is super exciting. We love to see our collection out there, connecting to, the scientific world and furthering the breadth of knowledge that there is about, the history of life on Earth. So no small thing. Another way, of course, to engage with fossil collections and museums is to be, the museum has a long relationship with educators in this community. And so here we get to sort of the focus of this month's Collections Close-Up blog, a local teacher named William Miller, who, like many teachers over the years, was, worked with the museum doing some programs. He was, known in the local papers for like doing a lot of science communication about like citing fossil finds that he often took his high school students on trips to see or to explore. And so, one of the specimens that we have several specimens from those collecting trips in our collection, including this fossil leaf impression that's in Monterey Formation shale. And so that's another formation that we have that, organizes our collections here in Santa Cruz, our collections of Santa Cruz. We have, a number of his students, like a gentleman named Jack Neubert, grew up to be fossil collectors, even if they didn't, become professional paleontologists or teachers. And you see those in our, specimens here. And then, we also have some folks like our longtime museum friend, Wayne Thompson, who went on both to continue to be a paleontologist enthusiast, or a paleontology enthusiast. Uh-oh, my screen share. I'm screwing it up, guys. Hang in there with me. Thank you so much. So Wayne, we're inviting him here today to talk about his continued relationship to getting people excited about paleontology and the natural world around them through hands-on experiences, through teaching, through fossil walks and collecting. Wayne, we are so glad to have you here with us today. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Thank you, Kathleen. Thank you, Marisa.
So I really would love to hear you talk about your personal story with the museum, Wayne, and start us off with how you got to know us in the first place.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you for welcoming me. I'm really enjoying being here, and I'll share some of my story with you guys. I started out at the Santa Cruz Museum as a sophomore in high school, and I continued there for about 4 years as an employee. And I really was, had very few reins, so to speak, put on me in terms of what I got to do. I did a lot of everything. I was at the museum desk on Sundays and Saturdays. I got to go out collecting, working on exhibits. Really, my job was going out and exploring and looking in the community for different things. Also, the community coming into the museum and folks bringing fossils in. I'd been interested in fossils for quite a while. And so many of the fossils that came across our desks during that time were pretty spectacular. This is the excavation of the mastodon that was found in Aptos. And it required quite a bit of engineering, really, to get it out. It was in the creek, and we had to divert the creek with pumps and lots of people, and it took quite a bit of effort. But once we got it back to the museum, it was a long time in preparation. It was broken in a few pieces, several hundred to be sure.
And you were involved in that preparation, right, Wayne?
Yeah. It took about a year and a half of working part-time to put it together. And because it was a rare find, we wanted to spend as much of detailed time on it as possible to get it into a shape that was as accurate as the original could be. But mastodons, as you probably can realize, are fairly rare creatures to be fossilized, especially in Central and Northern California. They're more common in Southern California. But
I love that that article that you showed earlier, Wayne. Too, like, that was a high school student, right, or a young person who found this in the creek, and you probably weren't much older than him at the time when you received it at the museum, right?
That's correct. We were about the same age, and Jim came in one day, and he had just dug this up. He didn't know what it was. He had it in a banana box and with a blanket over it, and he put it on the desk where I was working on Sunday, and said, I found this strange thing in the creek. I don't know what it is. I was looking for old bottles, and maybe if you could take a look at it. And I said, sure. And when he pulled the blanket back, I practically had a heart attack because I knew what it was. And it was the first mastodon in our area. So it's pretty spectacular find. And only a couple other evidences of mastodons have been found in our area. So it was pretty interesting to know that they got up into this area. Mammoths were known from our county for a while, but mastodon is something a little different. It's a browser rather than a grazer. Another notable fossil is the jaw of the whale in the back room there, and this is excavating it in the hills in Scotts Valley, and that jaw is pretty rare, as well as whole jaws aren't usually found in the Santa Margarita Formation. And unlike that mastodon, which is just a few thousand years old, this one's about 12 million years old. So quite a bit of difference. So the museum, in terms of making a difference in my life, really directed my career for the next 40 years, really, because the museum and that experience allowed me to broaden my perspectives and really refine what I wanted to do in life.
And we did have a question from someone in the chat, just to clarify, the whale jawbone that you brought up. You said that was found in Scotts Valley. Is that, someone asked if it was the sand dunes in Scotts Valley, or was it like cliffside, like where a quarry is?
Yeah, the jaw was found in the hills in Scotts Valley, and there's many different outcrops of the Santa Margarita, the quarries, the sides of the hills and things like that. And it was found in one of those areas.
Super cool.
Very cool. I love how I know that I said I was going to do a bunch of puns, and I kind of, didn't have time for them, but your newspaper clippings are really doing the job, I think. So then, we wanted to know a little bit more about, this story, and I was really excited, when I was first looking at our fossil collections and saw this set that were, donated by high school students. That just seemed like such an exciting way to get kids engaged. And so I was sort of wondering if you could talk a little bit more about, growing up with a teacher who had, took you guys out in the field to actually see these things, and how that affected how you, relate to science and what you do.
Absolutely. My high school earth science teacher was William Miller, and he was an incredible teacher. He was really ahead of his time in terms of allowing kids to design their own projects rather than study a book. And granted, books are great, but he really wanted to do hands-on learning. and experiential learning. So he was always out with us in the field whenever he could. We were out at different rock sections in Santa Cruz, went on many, many field trips with him. His room looked like a field trip. He was fossils everywhere, rocks. He was a great guy. We worked for him in the summer. He had an apple orchard, and probably a dozen students every summer were over helping him box up his apples for sale. But he was a wonderful individual and a great teacher. And for me, he really helped, along with the museum, kind of direct and shape my career and interest in the history of life in Santa Cruz County.
I'm wondering if you could speak more about that, Wayne, and how your young inspirations, the inspirations that you had when you were a child, maybe, influenced by Mr. Miller, but also others, like how did your young experiences shape who you are today? Because like Kathleen said, like we've seen that time and time again, looking through the collections and also with so much that we do as a museum working with youth. And yeah, I'm just curious to hear more about that.
Absolutely. I was unique and fortunate enough to grow up in a real life Jurassic Park, really. My dad and my grandfather built the Lost World in Scotts Valley, starting in 1960. And it was filled with life-size dinosaurs. And so from the time I was born until I was in my 20s, I lived in this park of animatronic life-size dinosaurs. And they were commissioned by a man named Jack Ohlert in Long Beach. And I was too young to remember it, but the story goes that the dinosaurs came in on dozens of flatbed semi-trucks into Scotts Valley, coming up the highway from Long Beach. And when they rolled in, people would just pull off the road and stop and look at all these dinosaurs coming down the road. And it was truly probably a spectacle. I wish I was older and could have seen it. But growing up in a park of life-size dinosaurs pretty much determined the course of the rest of my life. We lived in this castle that you see there behind the baby brontosaurus there. And a little bit later on, we had a life-sized T-Rex coming out the top of the turret in the castle that had a speaker in it. And one of my jobs was to welcome the guests to our park by talking in the speaker and the microphone in the castle. Another one of my jobs was to, this particular Triceratops was quite problematic. It would, the head would rock up and down, and we had a speaker in it too. And whenever the head rocked up and down, it growled. Well, this one was fairly problematic, and the motor was always breaking. So one summer, my job was to get up inside the belly of this, and on the giant metal I-beam that rocked, the head, which was a few hundred pounds, my job was to, when a customer would come by it, my job was to jump on the I-beam and growl at the customers because the motor was broken inside. So I doubt if any other kid in the world had that job as a young kid. So I felt pretty fortunate.
So, and I just learned this about you, Wayne, yesterday, even though I'm like appalled at not having found it out earlier. And I used to be like, I wonder what got Wayne into paleontology. And now I'm like, Wayne had no choice. There was no other option. I'm still like, I love this story. Pretty much, yeah. And I was very impressionable when I was young. And this particular picture, I remember, brings up a memory of great blue heron flying overhead when I was young. And I looked up, and great blue herons fly with their legs out and back of them. And I thought for sure that it was a pterodactyl. And probably for a year or so, I definitely knew that I had seen a pterodactyl flying through the sky. So,
well, yeah. And I mean, all kids love dinosaurs, right? Like that's like a universal thing. Kids love dinosaurs. And so I wonder if that is a good segue to talk about how, so we don't have dinosaurs in Santa Cruz. the rocks that I was talking about earlier, those are, we're talking about 3 million years, 7 million years, 12 million years. And maybe you guys watch and remember that, dinosaurs went away like 65 million years ago. And so, but you're a teacher, Wayne, and you teach science, and you do use fossils as engaging tools. So I'm just kind of curious about, like, okay, like, do you still talk about dinosaurs with your students, or are there other ways that, there are other things about fossils that you find engaging for your students?
Yes, absolutely. Fossils in and of themselves are an incredible engagement tool for inspiring young students. Fossils are usually marine, found in the watery sediments that used to be sediments anyway, now turned to stone. And these fossils are a window onto a world that is long gone now. And I tend to go out fossil hunting at night sometimes, and these are images of a fossil bed from the bottom of the ocean of Monterey Bay that has been preserved and turned to stone. And whenever I do that, I'm reminded of William Shakespeare's Tempest, where he says that full fathom 5 thy father lies, of his bones are coral made. Those were his eyes that are now pearls. Nothing of him doth remain, but doth suffer a sea change. This is a fossilized whale jaw in the sediment, now turned to rock in Santa Cruz. And the mystery of fossils is captive. It's at once captivating and so engaging, because when somebody picks up a fossil for the first time, the depth of time and history is imparted to one. Seeing them in an image is one thing, but actually engaging with them is something on a very foundational level, far and away different than any other experience you can imagine. I tend to think of a new branch of science called paleontology, which is the philosophical engagement in almost a spiritual relationship with these creatures that were living millions and millions of years ago, but that are, some of them, still alive today. And so it's absolutely, if someone has never picked up a fossil, it's an experience that I hope everybody gets to do at some point or another.
And they can if they live here in Santa Cruz.
There you go. They certainly can. It doesn't have to be a dinosaur. There's fossils. Most places do have fossils, and it's just a matter of getting out and looking in your environment and seeing where to go. Sometimes the road to the outcrop and the fossils is a little tough. Sometimes when you get there, the accommodations are not what you expect, but the view is incredible. This is our office in Dry Mesa, Colorado, right here, where Supersaurus is found. So the view from an office doesn't get much better. This is the same view right here, 2 different views. So paleontology sometimes can get one out into their natural environment, and collecting of fossils and engaging in the community of fossil collectors is a super enriching and rewarding experience.
I do have to ask though, just like looking at these photos, and I've seen some of them before, and I've always wondered, because like as a kid I really loved this the idea of being a paleontologist, but I've always wondered if I have the right level of focus, being out on those digs. Maybe this is a bad question, but did it ever get boring, and how did you deal with that?
Honestly, I can't say it has never been boring. I can't think of a moment, a single moment where it was boring. Because, finding a fossil, it's kind of like Christmas, you know. Is the approach of Christmas ever boring? When you know that you're going to be unwrapping a present, that's kind of what hunting for fossils is like. You know it's going to come. You know you're going to find something eventually, maybe longer. It may be years, and some paleontologists wait years for a fossil to come across their desk, like the mastodon. You know, who would have known? And so for me, at least, boring and paleontology don't quite go together too well. But yeah, I mean, there's a super wide range of ways that people can engage with paleontology and fossils, you know.
And that's maybe a good place, I think, just thinking about like the wide range. We've had a question about where else have you been able to look for fossils? So maybe if you could give us, just like, it seems like you've done a little bit of traveling and some local stuff, if you could give us a little bit of like the sense of scope for you.
Absolutely, absolutely. One of my biggest research projects was in the Gulf of Aden in Eastern Africa, looking for microscopic fossils. And these microscopic fossils were preserved in the sedimentary rocks, in the marine rocks in the Gulf of Aden. And what I did was I spent about 4 years digging through what are called deep sea cores, using this microscope you see here, and separating from the sediments the microscopic fossils. These fossils are called foraminiferans, and they're calcium carbonate, just like shells, and they're protozoans, and they're used to tell time for a relative time scale. And what we were doing was when a volcano erupted in the Turkana Basin, it sent an ash layer across the ocean and on land, and the ash layers were associated with human remains. And because these microscopic fossils in Africa were very good at recording relative dates and ages, we were able to figure out the age of the human fossils by comparing them to the ages of the marine fossils. A very unique and, what should I say, unique and good way to tell the age of the human fossils. Mostly in California, also in Montana. I had the opportunity to look at the end of the Cretaceous period, where mostly Triceratopses were found, different types of marine reptiles, Colorado, dry mesa. The Eastern Pacific is what I'm most familiar with. California, Oregon, and Washington. That's
an interesting thing, just to jump in there really quickly, that like I've learned for spending more time looking at like paleontological like related publications, is that when people say the Eastern Pacific, they mean the West Coast, right?
Yes, I'm sorry, yeah.
Yeah, which for me, I mean, it does make sense, but also like it was just hard for my mind to grasp. I think of us, you know, as thinking a different way. And
exactly.
You've had a lot of adventures, Wayne, and I think, you know, we can probably have some more questions about that in the Q&A after. And I kind of wanted to pivot a little bit, if you don't mind. You know, we're like looking at a piece of technology here. And, you know, one thing that we were hoping you could kind of share your experience with is like this massive shift that we've all been dealing with, you know, in response to the global pandemic, of like increased like distance learning and virtual education. And I know in our conversations prior, you always have been interested in like using new tools like 3D scanning and stuff like this. But we were wondering if you could talk about your experiences teaching virtually.
Absolutely. Virtual education is nothing new. The scope of virtual education today, though, is quite different, at least in our area. Because the schools are closed, teachers have had to rely on different tools to roll out their curricula to the students. And students are having to learn whole new ways of of learning on a massive scale as well. I can guarantee you that every single teacher who's teaching remotely right now will tell you that the level and depth of learning digitally is far and away less effective than being together in a classroom, no matter the subject. The value of being together with students in a room just cannot be underestimated. Digital learning is great. It's cool. It's flashy. Adults kind of get it a little better than kids do, and can learn digitally a little better than kids. But what we're seeing is that the amount and the quality and the depth of learning is by far and away better in the classroom than it is with, in front of a computer. So one of the things that some science teachers are doing is sending home equipment with kids. And I probably spent about 3 weeks in my classroom putting together bags of equipment that I've been collecting over the years. My cupboards are a lot more bare now, and so, which is a good thing, because I tend to be a collector. The new tools that are popping up are great, and it'll sustain us for a little while, but every teacher who's going digital right now is certainly looking forward to getting back in the classroom with their kids.
Yeah, and that's just a reminder to me about how important places like museums are. We were talking earlier about, how science is kind of a barrier for some people. I don't know, for those of us like watching today, how many of you grew up liking science versus how many of you like learned to develop an interest in science and or natural history. For me, it was developed for sure. And I didn't respond well to science teaching in school, but I did really respond well to museums. And really our museum is the one that kind of got me where I am. And, speaking about distance learning versus your way of that you want to teach, which is like experiential, bringing people out into the field. You're so eager to get people out into the field, and also like having people get their hands on things. And we're finding our ways though, aren't we? But
Certainly.
I think, the reminder that we are surrounded by fossils. So even though like our museum's closed, if you live in the Santa Cruz area, there are certainly plenty of places you could go right now to look at fossils right now and to touch fossils right now. And so maybe Wayne, could you share with us, since you're someone who like gets fossils and you've spent a lot of time studying them, I think that for a lot of us, sometimes we just don't really know where to start. And so can you spend a little bit of time helping us be better observers when we go out to maybe say Capitola Beach next time we want to look at fossils?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So first and foremost, when going out to look for fossils, the first thing anyone wants to keep in mind is safety, especially along the coast of the Monterey Bay. The rocks do fall, and I don't recommend to anybody that they get close to or approach the cliffs any closer than, 20 feet, 25 feet, because on more than one occasion I've been too close for comfort. But when looking for fossils, just like Marisa said at the beginning of our discussion, fossils are found in sedimentary rocks. And this one is a particularly good example of what to look for when you're looking at a fossil. Fossils have so many stories to tell us. There are quite a few creatures here. These purple crescents right here are from what are called princess slipper snails. And these parts right here on each one of those are giant barnacles called Megabalanus that lived on top of the princess slipper snails. And as we go through here, you can see that these are the princess slipper snails right here. And these are the giant barnacles that lived on top of these princess slipper snails. So one of the things that people want to keep in mind when they're looking at a fossil is that every fossil has a story to tell, especially about the life that it once led. This is what a princess slipper snail looks like. And you'll notice all these little dots here. These dots are from a drilling sponge that parasitized this princess's slipper snail. These are trackways of drilling marine worms that parasitize the outside of this snail shell as well. And these worms, they like to set up housekeeping right near where clams and snails take in food. And so they are kind of like, they go to a buffet and they don't leave, so to speak, because they mooch a meal off of the clam or snail just by virtue of living on or in the snail. And this is another example of those giant barnacles where you can see them a little better. But this one particular example is also interesting because of these traces right here. And I'll show a little bit larger picture of them in a minute. Those traces, and Marisa talked about this, are actually not actual fossils, but the remnants of where a fossil used to be. This right here is one of the princess slipper snails, but the shell is completely dissolved, and all that remains is the sediment that is filling in the trackways of the drilling sponge. These are all drilling sponges that parasitized the inside of this princess's slipper snail that had these giant barnacles living on it and that had those parasitic worms that were living on it. This all around here is the sediment from the bottom of the ocean of Monterey Bay. And that has traces in it too, of marine worms and different kinds of shrimp. And just fascinating. Here's a closer picture of the trace fossils of that drilling sponge in the shell that's now gone of the princess's slipper snail. And here's some trackways of marine worms in the sediment now turned to stone. So what can fossils tell us when we see them? Here's another associated fossil, a giant snail. And here's yet another fossil, a trace fossil. This is called Ophiomorpha. And it's the fossilized burrow of a ghost shrimp that used to live in this burrow next to the princess slipper snails with the giant barnacles living on it that had the boring sponges and the worms living in it. So when we look at fossils, every fossil has a story to tell. And the fossils are most likely in our area found in marine environment, unless you're finding a mastodon or a mammoth, of course.
Thank you so much. That's so interesting to see that, like, in one rock, there's such complexity. And really, you just have to look closer is what I'm learning from this. You don't necessarily need to know what each of those organisms are, but if you look more closely, you can tell that there is something interesting going on. And from those questions lead, to more questions. And I see the slide that you've pulled up leads in perfectly to that too, because as you've become engaged and become more curious, you develop more questions and then you want answers, right? So can you share with us, so I know Kathleen shared some resources earlier, and I think maybe I see some repeats here, but what are your favorite resources to direct people to learn more about this?
Absolutely. So I think the participants should keep this in mind. Let me tell a story. When I was young, I kept on finding a rock that looked just like a rock that I found the previous week. And I kept finding it week after week. And I didn't pick it up because it was just a rock. Sorry, all you geologists out there. But after a while, I realized, hey, this rock looks just like that rock that I found last week, and just like the other, and I've probably found half a dozen of them. Well, it turned out to be the inner ear bones of whales, and they look kind of like rocks. So professional paleontologists, anybody looking for fossils and at fossils, you might not know what it is at first, but if it piques your interest and you think it might be a fossil, here's a couple places you can go. First and foremost, go here, the Santa Cruz Museum. They have resources that will probably answer you guys' questions. If you're not able to go there, other places, great places to go, the Department of Invertebrate Zoology and Geology at the California Academy of Sciences is a great resource, especially for invertebrate fossils in our area. And another one is the Museum of Paleontology at UC Berkeley. They have an incredible department of public outreach. Lisa White is the director there, and she puts together incredible events every year. Short courses, the short courses are 2-day events. The last one was on the great mammalian ice age extinctions. They've had short courses on dinosaur extinctions and a range of other great topics that the public is invited to come to. They have special events and docent-led tours, and Cal Day is always a great time to go to the Paleontology Museum at Berkeley. They put on a show, and you'll see fossils dug out of their collections that you will never see on exhibit. So that's a great thing not to miss. And another thing that they have is the education, and there are some digital resources that we're putting together now in terms of virtual field trips to the Santa Cruz fossil localities that people can log online and go on a virtual field trip to the Purisma Formation, both here in Santa Cruz and up in the northern sections of its exposure. So those are the main ones that I recommend people going to in terms of gathering more information about the curious things you find when you start digging in the ground.
Thank you so much for that, Wayne. We did have a question in the chat specifically about collecting fossils, and we expected that this was going to come up. So maybe both you and Kathleen can kind of talk about this a little bit. So Gil's wondering, what should you record when you collect a fossil? And also, can we just clarify a little bit, like who can collect what and where?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great topic and a great question. Generally, fossils shouldn't be collected unless a permit is on hand. There's some gray areas and there's some non-gray areas. The non-gray areas are that most invertebrates that are not found on private land and not on public land as well. So most invertebrates that are found it's legal to collect as long as it's not in somebody's yard or not on a private land. All vertebrate fossils, that is illegal to collect a vertebrate fossil on any land in the U.S. And so I don't recommend, if you think it's a bone or a tooth or something like that, I recommend that first photograph it, next bury it, and then go to a museum and see what the photograph might be of, and tell somebody at the museum what is this? Ask them. And so the regulations in terms of collecting fossils, if you're a scientist or an educator using it for public education, those are often the ones that have the permits to go and collect. Does that kind of answer the question?
Yeah, and I would just say, we do get a lot of folks who find fossils or who have had fossils in their yards for years who come and say oh, it's time, I want to give this to the museum. And in some cases, those things, specimens are significant enough. I think we did a blog post January of 2019 about a mammoth tooth fragment that we absolutely did want to collect. It was related to some other, or potentially related to some other specimens that we have. It helps establish a record of that animal around here. But definitely pictures are always the best thing for us, because oftentimes we don't have a lot of space and we're, you know, not necessarily going to be able to take something on right now. But the most important thing is location, both so you can go back and find the thing, but also a location is going to help build up the knowledge of the context of the fossil, which will be useful for like education or scientific understanding. And so that's, even if you don't know what it is, as long as where it is was part of what you wrote down, that would be the thing I would highlight the most.
Absolutely. The location is critical. Also the date. If you're the person that collected it, make sure you have your name on the material, what you think it might be. And you know, in today's environment, you know, latitude and longitude are super easy to figure out on your iPhone or your smartphone. So not only take a picture, but grab the latitude and longitude, and that's super helpful, especially if you're out in an area where there's no landmarks. But I highly encourage people to, if they have fossils, bring them to the museum, so that the scientists there can have a better idea of what we have in our area, because that's how most of the significant fossils are found, to tell you the truth, is by people like you guys bringing them in and sharing it with the museum.
Yeah, I thanks for clarifying those points. I'll also just add that, you know, if you notice something interesting, just like we've been saying, taking a picture, noting the location, not only is that going to be useful if you're bringing it to an expert or to a museum, or if you're wanting to be able to collect it or wanting to be able to share it with an institution, it'll also just help you personally, as we were talking about, in your gaining your own understanding. It might be something that you have no interest in sharing or removing or anything like that. But if you do, you know where you are, it's going to be that much easier to figure out what kind of rocks are around you and the history of those rocks. And so therefore, like what kind of, the example that you were sharing, Wayne, about these random rocks that you kept finding that turned out to be whale ear bones, like if you realize that the rocks that you're around, maybe you're 1,000 feet elevation, but if you learn that the rocks around you are ancient seabed deposits, then that's going to provide some context for you too. So,
Absolutely.
Only good things can come of recording your observations. It's also a great way to learn. Can you actually talk about that a little bit, Wayne, really quickly? Just, do you have any thoughts on like nature journaling and recording observations when you're out in the field? Because it's one of my favorite things to talk about. So.
Absolutely. So nature journaling with paleontology has a deep history. It goes back to Victorian times, when people will go out, and this was a community event. Entire communities would go out for a Sunday picnic and fossilize. And they would often journal and do collecting. And they would make Wunderkamers, which a Wunderkamer is a cabinet of natural curiosities. And this was a big thing back in Victorian times. And so developed over the years, nature journaling today, digital of course, but recording where it is, recording texture, color, what's around it, making drawings and photographs. Sometimes people make castings of certain things, animal tracks and fossils that are no longer there, casts of fossils that have been dissolved is a big thing, and so doing those nature journaling types of activities can be super rewarding and very. It kind of brings out the artistic piece of it, and goes right along with the aesthetics and beauty and wonder of engaging with these things that are just millions and millions of years old. Like I said, you can watch whales on TV for as long as you want, but until you're out and actually right next to the whale, you'll never get to feel what it's like to be next to a whale. And that's just what, going fossil hunting and holding a fossil that nobody's ever touched in your hand is like. It's an experiential event. And so capturing that in a journal, you can approach it, but you'll never be able to actually capture it. Same with the picture, but still gathering that information is super important. Color, just like I said, color and texture and shapes and things that are around it. If you do think you found a fossil, it's important to keep it in the spot that you found it, because so many times folks have brought a fossil in and then gone back and tried to find where it was found, and they couldn't exactly pinpoint it, and it might have been in this layer and it might have been in that layer. So it's really important from a scientific standpoint to record that information without trying to disturb the fossils itself.
Yeah, and I love, I'm glad you brought back like the aesthetics and the beauty part, because I did want to just note that, both Kathleen and I love your illustration of walking through an undersea world at night on Capitola Beach, and really like setting the scene in that way. And I just think it's really good for all of us, especially, a lot of the people watching, they may not be scientists, they may not be in this field, but still have their own interest with it. And so I just want to reiterate that, like, even if there's not going to be any like discernible or like some scientific goal at the end of your exploration, there's a lot of meaning still to be found, even if it's personal meaning. And so I just really appreciate that about you, Wayne, that you acknowledge that. And really, you never know what's going to come of that experience. And that is very much rooted in like the history of science, as people not doing anything for, not doing the work for the sake of an end goal, just doing it for the sake of exploring. And so that's all of our jobs and our roles.
It certainly is. Paleontology.
Yeah. And so we're going to be wrapping up soon, but I did want to share with everyone joining us that as we did share, the museum is a resource for you. You can always email us. You can email collections@santacruzmuseum.org. That goes to Kathleen if you have questions about something that you found. You can email me at events@santacruzmuseum.org too. We're always happy to try to hook you up with the right resource. And also, if you go to our website, we do have, Kathleen writes these wonderful blogs every month that do explore different aspects of our collections. And, also hearkening back to what we were talking about with Wayne, as a middle school teacher who not only is a paleontologist, but also is hard at work engaging youth. That's also what the museum is all about. And so for those of you who know kiddos who you hope to grow into their naturalist shoes, there's a lot of resources on our website there as well. And we also have our Rockin' Pop-Up that the next one's going to be October 7th, I believe. So just know that we're your museum. We're so grateful that you're a part of our community, that you're a member with us. And we hope that this program today has also illustrated just how much, just local Santa Cruz kiddos and citizens and members of the museum, like how much of a legacy has been cast by people like you, Wayne. So thanks again.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks
Thank you
for
everyone for
the
coming.
Yeah.
Thank you, Wayne.
All right, and we hope to see you all next month for our next collections close-up event. And enjoy your evening. Stay safe.